Now that we have made our way through the historical journey in the development of Hinduism, it's time to take a step back from history and look at some practices within the tradition. Many introductory textbooks, for example, would kind of follow this sort of structure by looking at the historical development of a particular religion, highlighting some of the key moments and doctrines that emerge, and then maybe take a break and look at some of the practical side of the religion with rituals, festivals, etc. So we'll look at a few to start here and then conclude with another video discussing some more rituals and some contemporary items within Hinduism. So to begin, and again, this is just a selection of the many different practices that we could choose to discuss within Hinduism. Let's look at the sacred syllable, Om. Now, many of you have probably heard Om being recited before. If I asked you to picture in your mind somebody seated in a position of yoga, a position of meditation, and chanting something, you might be thinking of the syllable Om. What's interesting for our purposes is that this is nearly universally recognized by Hindus as the sacred sound, the sacred syllable. And of course, what's also interesting to us, since we are always focused on the complexity and diversity of Hinduism, is that even though most Hindus recognize Om as the sacred syllable, there will be different meanings attached to that sound. So for some Hindus, while Om is the most sacred syllable, it means one thing, and for other Hindus, it means something else. Its meaning comes from a different source, from a different set of ideas. We won't worry too much about those different meanings attached to Om, but it is important to remember that when you hear that sound, that is believed to be the sacred syllable, and that is why it is so important, especially in the practice of meditation. Next, we can look a little bit at the section of temple worship, or the idea of temple worship, as well as puja, which is often described within Hinduism as domestic worship. In other words, to worship gods and goddesses for whatever reason, you can certainly go to a temple, or you can do the worship at home. And for most Hindus, you will make use of both throughout your life. In terms of temple worship, for many Hindus, while going to temple is important for certain festivals, going to temple on a more daily basis is more of a come and go as you please sort of situation. So if you ever want to visit a Hindu temple, of course you could go during a festival celebration, but otherwise you could just go at any time, and typically there will be a priest or more than one priest there to assist Hindus in making their prayers to certain deities for certain purposes, or if they are there to engage in worship in the form of bhakti yoga, to do that worship appropriately, to perhaps sing songs, or to again make offerings or prayers to those deities. So when you go to a temple, you will probably see many different deities represented. For many Hindus, the statues or the figures of the deities are not believed to just be statues or inanimate objects. The belief of many Hindus, not all, is that the deities themselves are present in these statues, in these representations. So for example, in many temples, if it gets hot, there might be a priest who is fanning these statues, which to us might look strange if we go in and we don't know anything about Hinduism, but it's important to realize that those statues are not just statues for many Hindus. The deities are fully present. Perhaps one of the closest analogies might be the way that Roman Catholic Christians, for example, view the Eucharist after it has been consecrated. The bread and the wine are no longer bread and wine, they are the body and blood of Christ. Or you could look at the way sacred texts, the Quran, or the Hebrew scriptures are viewed in a mosque or in a synagogue as being worthy of reverence because of the presence of the divine in those words, in those scrolls or books. So something similar is going on for many Hindus in temples. Again, not all Hindus will acknowledge this. A group like the Brahmo Samaj that we talked about in the previous video focused on kind of strict rationalism, trying to move beyond various superstitions as they view it, will be ones who may not sign on to this view of the statues that are present within the Hindu temples. And again, there will be many different deities present. Remember, even after the wave of bhakti that spreads throughout Hinduism, the deities are still here for us in terms of day-to-day life. That early portion of the Vedas focused on this worldly blessings is still very much a part of the daily life of most Hindus. So again, if you are a student and you have an upcoming exam, you will go to the temple and find the representation of Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and the priest may be there to help you make an offering to Sarasvati so that she will provide you clarity of mind as you go in to take the test. Ganesha is one of the most popular of all Hindu deities. You can recognize him pretty easily because he is the elephant-headed deity. He is the son of Shiva and Parvati, and he has an elephant head with a trunk, and he is believed to be the remover of obstacles. And what this means is that if you are going to start a new business, for example, Ganesha is very important because he is the one who will take care of any obstacles that are in your way. If you visit places of business owned by Hindus, for example, where I live, some of the Indian restaurants are owned by Indian Americans who are Hindus. You will often very quickly see images of Ganesha in those restaurants because of his importance at removing obstacles. So you would go to the temple and make certain offerings or offer prayers to Ganesha for that purpose. So there are many different deities present, and if we were in India, the temple would probably be focused on the particular deity that that community elevates in order to practice the path of devotion, bhakti yoga. In a place like America, where each Hindu community might be relatively small and may not be able to build the kind of temple that they want, different communities, Vaishnavas, Shaivas, Shaktas, will come together in order to finance and build one amazing temple, and that means that those central deities all have to be kind of present for different Hindus going in together. In some ways, this has been helpful, as now different Hindu communities outside of India especially are engaged together in a way that might not have been the case back in the homeland of Hinduism. Again, puja is the domestic worship. Many Hindus will have smaller representations of their deities in their homes, and they are able to, again, offer prayers, make other offerings for those deities, not only for bhakti yoga, but also for the day-to-day life, whether praising or petitioning those deities for happiness and health and prosperity. One other thing that you'll notice if you are at a temple is all of the different kinds of symbolism that are present in the pictures or the sculptures of the deities. And you could take art classes that just focus on Hindu art, for example. You could do Google searches and look at some of the different pictures and note some of the most important kind of icons of Hindu deities. The dancing Shiva is always one that you will notice, and his different arms and legs signify unique things, the things that he holds in his arms. The fact that his one of his feet is kind of elevated suggests that under him you can find comfort and safety and guidance. So a lot of these symbols are present in the different representations of the deities. One of the also kind of common sculptural representations is of the linga and the yoni, which if you see this, the linga, kind of this stone shaft that very much looks like a male sexual organ placed inside a yoni, a receptacle that seems to resemble a female sexual organ. And these have a unique importance within Hinduism. Most Hindus aren't necessarily thinking of the sexual act when they see the linga and the yoni, but they are thinking of Shiva and Parvati, whom they represent, as well as, in a kind of tantric sense, that union of male and female, the union of energies and the harmony that we are seeking in this world, right? We can move on here and talk briefly about forehead marks, kind of a very common practice that many of us think of when we think of Hindus. Forehead marks are most commonly worn by women. If you're picturing a Hindu with a forehead mark, it's most likely a woman, probably with the bindi, the single red dot on her forehead. Women within Hinduism may wear forehead marks at a young age, but forehead marks, along with having kind of significance for maybe one's community or place of origin, are often used to signify marital status. So women, as we'll see in the next video, will be given the permanent forehead mark that they will wear constantly when they are married. So it is a signification of being married. And for our purposes, it's also possible for forehead marks to have a religious significance. So if you are worshiping Vishnu or Shiva or the goddess in one of her forms, you might have different marks on your forehead, whether horizontal lines or vertical lines or dots and crescents. There are different things that can be placed on foreheads to signify religious meaning, along with marital status, place of origin, also just being used as a form of adornment. Men will sometimes wear forehead marks, maybe for important holy days, or holy teachers may more frequently wear forehead marks, but primarily it is something that is more frequently associated with women, especially married women within Hinduism. Next, I've listed a couple of the major festivals. I've mentioned festivals and holy days a couple of times. There are many different festivals within Hinduism, as there are in most religious traditions. Here are two of the most important. First, Navaratri. As with many things that we've seen within Hinduism, each of these festivals will be pretty much universally important to Hindus, and yet they might have different meanings or different interpretations of these festivals given their own community and their geographical place of origin, etc. Navaratri is most commonly a festival to celebrate the goddesses. So this is where, whether or not you are a worshiper of Devi in her many forms in terms of bhakti yoga, this is a time for all Hindus to worship the goddesses. All the different consorts of the male deities, the other goddesses that are important for the Hindu day-to-day life, as well as for those who elevate Devi in one of her forms for bhakti yoga. The other festival that I've listed here is Deepavali, sometimes transliterated as Diwali or even Diwali. I've mentioned the Office episode of Diwali and mentioned that in that episode, Dwight talks about the origin of Diwali by referencing the coronation of Ram at the end of the Ramayana. That is definitely the meaning attached to Diwali for some Hindus. But again, for other Hindus, especially those for whom Krishna is the more important avatara of Vishnu, Diwali might be a time to remember a particular moment in Krishna's existence. And for still others, Diwali might simply be a kind of New Year's celebration. So once again, we see that complexity. There is a sense of consensus in terms of celebrating these important festival days, but there is a great deal of complexity and diversity when it comes to interpreting or giving meaning to these various festivals.